Hi, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of our Live Well podcast. In today's session, we'll be discussing a topic that I don't believe is spoken about a lot, and that is bone health. When we hear about bone health, we tend to think that, it's just something that needs to be focused on in childhood to early adulthood. But after that, no one really pays attention to it until, something happens, such as, fracturing a wrist or even breaking a bone. So today, I would just like to, delve into that topic a little bit. And to do that with me, I have a very, very special person, and that's Dr. Jamila Belgrave. Hi, Doc.
Hi, Josanne.
So welcome on set. How are you feeling today?
I'm good. Thank you for having me.
Are you excited to be here?
I'm very excited.
How do you feel about bone health?
Well, bone health, as you said, it's not a bread and butter topic for me. It's not something that we'll see every day because we mostly deal with diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease. But as you said, it's very important and it's something that, needs to be discussed.
Before we even get into that, I jumped the gun. Can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure, that's okay. Again, I'm Jamila Belgrave, Dr. Belgrave, and I am a family physician, and I've been practicing in the field of family medicine, both publicly and privately, for the last 15 years or so. I know I look young, but yeah.
You definitely do. You look lovely.
Thank you.
So you said something very important there. We do focus on all the non-communicable diseases, and we tend to shy away from certain topics. Bone health is definitely one of those. Do you think that this is an important topic that we need to start bringing to the forefront?
Yes, I think especially as we get older, people think old age is so far away, but it creeps up on all of us. And I mean, once you have the foundational knowledge, you can know ahead of time what to do with your diet and your general lifestyle to have good bone health for a long time.
Would you be able to probably take us through the stages of how, our bones develop and what is needed through from childhood into adulthood?
Okay, well, it's a bit complicated, right? But trying not to get into a full-fledged chemistry class, right? We actually keep developing our bones all the way into our early 20s and even up to 30 for men, right? So it's important to note that our bones is like it's an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. We grow. We have our peak growth up until 17, but in terms of our bone density, men and women, we achieve our maximum bone density at around 25 to 30. So what happens? The cells of our bones, we have building blocks called osteoblasts, and ones that break down bones called osteoclasts. Try not to get too complicated, right? But they both build and break down bone at the same time, sometimes in the same bone at different spots, and sometimes at the same location, continuously over time, always increasing our bone density, as I said, up to mid to late 20s.
Okay, great. And I know also that while that happens then, our bones still always go through remodeling.
Yes.
Forever, basically. So therefore, bone health is a topic of concern for the entirety of our lives, and it doesn't just stop during that process that you just mentioned.
Correct. You are absolute. I'm glad you said the word remodeling. That's a succinct way of saying it. Our bones are constantly remodeled. Bone density max is reached at that age that I mentioned. But you're right. There's a literature to say that every 10 years, our bones remodel.
So to give us technically at least almost a new skeleton every 10 years. Technically speaking.
Yes.
Yeah. So what that goes to show is that some of the essential minerals now that are associated with this, both remodeling and remodeling process, so like calcium and phosphorus, at some point the rate changes. So when we're younger, I know it's said that it's almost the same. The amount that's removed from the bones is usually the amount that's given back in terms of calcium. But once we reach that peak bone mass, as you've mentioned, the rate differs in terms of the rate of loss tends to become greater than the rate of bone remodeling, basically.
Right, you are correct. So the rate of the bone absorption and resorption changes over time as we get older. Based on your gender, men are different to women, but it's important to know that it's constantly happening so that we could all be conscious of our bone health even as we grow older. And your lifestyle changes too. How active we are, all of those things affect our bone health.
Okay, great. And would you then say that even into our late adulthood that we need to pay attention to the foods that we eat now? Because I know you see a lot of things on social media where they say, you don't really need to have certain food groups because our bodies don't really need any calcium, well, not as much calcium anymore. What would you say to that?
That is not true, because clearly when you're growing and you have your growth spurt when you're younger, you're going to need more compared to when you're a young adult. But then when you start to age, women go through menopause, men go through andropause, another topic not much spoken about. You would have a higher requirement for calcium and vitamin D to make sure you have good bone health.
And like that you mentioned vitamin D, I think sometimes we focus so much on calcium as well. We forget that, vitamin D does help with that absorption from the intestines to put it into our body and put the calcium into circulation.
Correct.
And well, we know one of the main sources of vitamin D is it can be produced or synthesized within the skin once it's exposed from sunlight. But also there are dietary sources of it. So things like the egg yolk. Some of us tend to shy away from it. We remove the egg yolk, throw it away, but it's so nutrient dense. Do you eat egg yolks?
I sure do. And you also have to think about vitamin D. Yes, we get it from sunlight, but people live in climates, Canada, where it's cold most of the year, so they don't get a lot of vitamin D from sunlight. So they have to make sure they get the vitamin D from, as you said, egg yolk, certain fishes, and to help with absorption of calcium that will strengthen their bones.
Great. So we know that sometimes we don't pay attention to it, and while genetics and the environment have huge effects on your bone health, if besides the genetics part now, we could actually control the environmental factors such as lifestyle and your dietary part of it and physical activity. But let's say that for some reason the bones are weak, or you develop or you are predisposed to certain conditions. What are some of those lifestyle conditions that can occur as it relates to bone health?
Right, I'm glad you said that. So you can't change your genetics, you can't change that, but you can change your lifestyle. So all the literature shows that certain exercises, and specifically weight-bearing exercises, and weight-bearing sounds like heavy, but simple things like standing instead of sitting, walking, jogging. It doesn't have to be heavy weights, right? So just weight-bearing. Because fun fact, they say that astronauts who live in space for a very long time, they lose their bone density over time because they're floating around. There's no gravity, right? So they don't bear their own weight. So simple as walking, standing, jogging, running. Those are weight-bearing exercises. And the second category is strength training, right? So simple things like squat strength training. I think of the gym, right? But it's not necessarily that. Squats, overhead raises, a lot of people who are gym people, they have their machine and do their presses and stuff. But simple things, you could buy 5-pound weights. If you don't have weights, you can, use
something.
A bottle of water. So it's weight-bearing exercises and strength training. Also with resistance bands. Sometimes, I have a little stepper. Lord knows I should use it more, right? With the bands, the resistance bands to pull. All that develops your bone density and improves your bone health overall.
Okay, great. And if persons don't do all those things, what are some conditions or diseases that, may develop as it relates to bone health?
Right. So as you go older, if your bone density decreases, which it does so naturally for women and for men, as women go through menopause, late 40s, early 50s, or later, the estrogen levels drop. So estrogen is protective of your bones, so you naturally get less dense bones. And same thing for men, their testosterone levels drop, so they can have decreased bone density. And once you have that, you have increased risk of fractures. So that's called osteoporosis, right? Not to be confused with osteoarthritis.
Okay.
Right. So osteoporosis is decreased bone density that happens often with age, often with not doing all the lifestyle and dietary things that we've talked about thus far. But osteoarthritis, which we're not really talking about today, is more, we see it so commonly. Yeah, knee pain, hip pain, joint pain. That really comes with degeneration of the joints, and that's more inflammatory versus what we're talking about is like your bone density.
Okay. And are there any other things that can affect bone health or cause conditions related to bone health besides the osteoporosis and the osteoarthritis?
Right. So I believe you're asking other things like smoking and alcohol. So excessive smoking, excessive alcohol, the excess alcohol depresses your estrogen and your testosterone hormones in your body. So over time, that could affect your bone health. And chronic smoking is like this chronic inflammatory state in your body, and that also affects your bone health over a long term.
So definitely bone health is something that we should all be mindful of when we're thinking about all the different conditions or all the different preventative care that we do for ourselves. We should always keep this in the back of our mind. Thank you for explaining those things, Dr. Belgrave. Another point I would like to bring up, I was doing some reading and they were actually mentioning that birth control usage can actually have an effect on bone health. Would you be able to possibly elaborate on that?
Sure, I can touch on that. Well, we all know millions of women around the world use birth control to plan their families. We call it family planning, right? So one of the more popular birth controls is called the Depo-Provera. It's an injectable. Women take it every 3 months, and it's progesterone based, right? But studies have shown that the progesterone and estrogen, they have such a relationship where if you're on that particular birth control, you can decrease your estrogen levels. So just like you have to be mindful as an older woman going into menopause when your estrogen levels are dropping, because you want to be thinking about your bone health and your bone density. Similarly, when you're on birth control, in particularly progesterone-based birth control, we try to tell women at least once a year when they do their blood work to check their calcium levels. We want them to be cognizant of if they're having any bone pain, be careful of falls, and once that's fine, they're free to be on their birth control, for an extended period. And studies have also shown when they come off of these progesterone-based birth controls, their bone health improves right away as well.
Therefore, when persons are on birth control, there are checks that can be done to make sure that everything is fine, and it's not that when they come off 4 years later, they find out that, this was being affected.
Correct. We have a good conversation. Make sure if you are on birth control, particularly progesterone injectables, you have a conversation with your doctor to be checking on your bone health with your annual physical, your annual blood work. That's all.
Okay. So we touched a little bit on the dietary sources for some of the key nutrients, and we know there are other nutrients obviously that play an important role in bone health. So having a variety of foods, we always stress have a variety of foods, have different colors all the time, eat the rainbow, and that will also contribute towards promoting good bone health.
Yes.
But let's say for some reason persons are unable to, reach the desired levels for certain things like vitamin D or calcium or any one of the other nutrients, would you then suggest supplementation? And if yes, what will you suggest?
Definitely. So we all should try to get our calcium and our vitamin D from diet, as we mentioned before. But if for some reason, particularly you're older, and you have a concern about your bone density, you have a conversation with your doctor and you ask about supplements, which ones you should take and how much. So, they're easily available. You can buy vitamin D, you can buy calcium. There's certain recommendation levels based on your gender, based on your age. So that's a conversation to have with your doctor. It's about 1,000 milligrams a day, 1,200 milligrams a day, varies male and female. The other nutrients that you mentioned, they're not as high on the list as calcium and vitamin D regarding bone health, but magnesium, phosphorus, you try to get it in a well balanced diet, as you said, and they are also available over the counter, no prescription needed. You can get them as supplement.
Thank you so much, Dr. Belgrave, for discussing this topic with me. Are there any key takeaways that you would like our listeners to leave with in this episode?
Well, as you said before, it's not commonly discussed. Not people don't even think about their bones. We take our bones for granted, I think. But keep in mind that our bones are, holding us together, making us walk and function every day. And to keep our bones healthy for as long as possible, we should try to have a balanced diet with calcium, vitamin D, get as much sunlight as you can, of course within moderation, right? And to also exercise, weight-bearing exercises, strength training exercises, and have a conversation with your doctor and do your once a year annual checkup, especially and voice your concerns if you have any questions about bone health.
Thank you so much, and everyone, you heard it. It's important to pay attention to bone health. It is something that it's a concern for the entirety of our lives. Pay attention to your diet, and also physical activity. Always super important. And if you're like me and all you like to do is run all the time, just remember that you need to have a balance between you're running and walking, as well as trying to put in some of the weight bearing and strength training exercises. So thank you everyone for tuning in today, and I hope you enjoyed today's session.